Well, welcome everyone. I'm going to take my mask off for speaking because that's much clearer, I know. My name is Lori Lightgeb. I'm on the board of Historic Pittsford, and I am really pleased to have this as an opportunity this evening for you who are all here, and also for those who will be able to watch this later. We will be recording this in the hopes that it's something that we can put up on both the town website and on Historic Pittsford website, and it continues to be a resource for our community to learn more about the Greenprint. There's a few pieces of information before we get started. I just wanted to let you know about our next upcoming event. Will be in the same room on November 16th. Audrey Johnson, who is taking a seat right now, is going to be presenting on the early history of this library. So it would be, it definitely makes sense that she would be here in the library speaking about the early history of our community library in Pittsford, and that's November 16th at 7 p.m. So be on the lookout for that. And in relationship with what we'll be talking about tonight, two important people who are part of this as well that you may touch on, or I'm not sure, but Maria Brzezinski, who was the organizer of the Greenbelt Association, and John Bean, who was the planner who helped with the Greenprint, are also very excited about having opportunities to talk with the community this year about the Greenprint as well. So this is the first in a number of opportunities to learn more about this as a community. And we would also like to, we're brainstorming some ideas to also present farmer perspectives, because that's the other major piece, and also involve in some different, not just adult, but family-oriented sort of engagement that we can have in the spring. So be on the lookout for that. Your membership matters. If you are not a member of Historic Pittsford, I encourage you to do so that we can bring more of this type of programming to our community. We have some membership forms in the back, and if you'd like to just subscribe to our newsletter or to the town e-news if you don't receive it already, there are QR codes or a place where you could just write down your information and we can get you on those lists so you can stay informed with what's going on in our community. Thank you to the town for recording this evening, and to Shelley, who works for the town and is on the board of Historic Pittsford, for being our recorder this evening. That's a big piece of this, so we can bring it back to the community. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our current town supervisor, Bill Smith.
Thank you, Lori, and thank you, Historic Pittsford, for organizing this event. Thank you, Lori, for all your hard work on it. And yes, if you haven't joined Historic Pittsford, please do, because they do so much. I mean, among the things you may not know about, when I have my house designated as a historic home, because I wanted to encourage people to look into that as an option. That's important to Historic Pittsford. They were tremendously helpful in helping me get from start to finish in that process, and I really appreciate it. Whatever goals I may accomplish in public life to come, or whatever goals I've accomplished up to now, I know right now that the single thing that I am most proud of in public service was casting a vote as a member of the town board to approve Pittsford's Greenprint for the future. And I would never have had the opportunity to do that were it not for our speaker tonight. There would be no Greenprint without Bill Carpenter. And let me just tell you a few words about why that's true. First of all, he had the vision. Pittsford had made, on a smaller scale, an attempt to do something about this a few years before, and it had been defeated in a referendum, and for reasons beyond my scope. Maybe Bill will talk about that a bit tonight. But Bill came into office, elected in 1993, and had the vision to want to do this. He didn't need to do this beyond the merits of the concept itself, but it was something that he had a deep investment in as the right thing to do for the community despite the obstacles. So he had the vision. He also had the courage. And I want you to think, today we look at the Greenprint and we look at the concept of purchasing development rights. Sure, yeah, that's a great tool to be able to do something like this. I want you to cast your mind back, if you were around then or if you weren't, trying to imagine back in 1993. It took courage to put this forward. It was difficult, and still it remains difficult for many people to understand what it means to purchase development rights. I remember almost 40 years ago now as a law student, it took me a while to sort of understand this concept and to understand what it meant. But you'll remember the public meetings that we were in, and you were in many of them for a few years before I came on the town board, where, what do you mean? You're buying air? You're paying millions of dollars for air? You're buying a farm and then you're giving it back to the farmer for free? Who would do that? And I remember many of the conversations we had with some fairly irate people who were residents of the town and simply couldn't either get the idea and why it was good for the town or grasp the concept at all. So Bill had the vision. Bill had the courage, and it took a lot of courage. And Bill had the perseverance. And for several years before I ever showed up on the scene of the town board, he had been working on this. I cannot imagine. I have an intellectual concept and understanding of the hours and hours and hours and hours of public meetings and public planning sessions and interacting with members of the public, many of whom, as I said, were hostile, for years, that brought this to fruition. I don't think I have the physical stamina or the temperamental stamina to be able to do what Bill did over a series of years to make this happen for Pittsford. I think Bill's heard me make this reference before, so at the risk of boring you, if you ever have the chance to visit St. Paul's Cathedral in London, you can, if you like, see the tomb of Sir Christopher Wren, one of the great architects of the 17th century, who designed St. Paul's after the Great Fire of London in 1666. His tomb is there. It's a very simple epitaph. It's in Latin. In English it says, "Here lies Christopher Wren. If you seek his monument, look around." And so it's my great pleasure to present to you my colleague and my friend, Bill Carpenter. And if you seek his living monument, you just look around.
Thank you, Bill. You know, I appreciate the trust and support you gave me while you were on the town board. You were a very important member of that and really appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here. It's hard 25 years has gone by. I guess that gives me an idea why just a few weeks ago I turned 70. I'm not sure how I got there either, but in spite of myself and in spite of a lot of things, happy in doing that. So this is a great story. Of how this really came together through a lot of people's hard work. So there's a lot of details behind. I'm going to give about the historical facts that led up to it, and then really how we got involved and actually created the Greenprint. So just as a little background, I actually worked for the town for 32 years. I worked from 1980 to 2012. The first from 1980 to 1993, I was in Public Works. I was the Commissioner of Public Works. Had the great pleasure of working under Supervisor Paul Spiegel, who was my great mentor. He was just here. He just celebrated his 101st birthday. Wonderful man, and he taught me. He taught me that politics was the vehicle to get elected and to serve, but governance every day was the important activity. And I lived that through my whole career, and I'll never forget it. And I have tons of respect for him. Whoop, went the wrong way already. Not sure how we're getting. We shouldn't be there. No, I'm sorry, we should be. So, in 1985, under Supervisor Maggie Freeman, there was a comprehensive plan adopted. And this played in a lot of ways to a lot of what was done, both from the concept of open space and farmland preservation. But there was two new zoning classifications that came out of that. You'll see SRAA, which was suburban residential, which is primarily in the north part of this map, basically covered the golf courses and the colleges and a little bit of the Powers Farm. And then there was RRAA, rural residential, primarily in the southern part of town. The significance of this, under the rules for rural residential, it required cluster development. So the developers could get full density for the property, but they could only develop it on half the property. So 50% of all properties had to be designated as open space as part of that. So it's going to come in and play a very, very big role in here. 1989, in the 85 master plan did call for farmland preservation and did talk about using purchase of development rights. As Supervisor Smith said, people did not know what purchase of development rights was. I mean, essentially, properties are a bundle of rights. There's air, there's mineral, there's all the, and development is one of those rights they have. So in 1989, the town had 2 votes for the purchase of development rights. The first one was for the Sweeney Farm on East Street. So that passed by 3,200 to 2,800. Later that year, there was a second referendum held. That was in November, which lost. And there was actually a 38% increase in votes. So we went from about 6,000 voting to about 8,300 people voting. Very controversial. The developers got involved, ran ads. There were people in the community who, to their right, just didn't believe in spending the money that was being talked about to buy development rights. So that was defeated. And I will tell you, that influenced me. It left such hard feelings. People were divided at families. People were divided at their dinner tables over this issue, and that's just not good for a community. Then, later in December 1992, a report was issued. This is what is called Pittsford 2000. And this group of people was put together. They were essentially all people from the community, all aspects of the community were asked to come together and look at the community and give recommendations. Say, what are your thoughts? Where should we be going? It called for really several things. One, it said agricultural presence is at risk, which we all knew. The farms were under tremendous problems. You know, I don't know if all of you understand, the problem with the farmland was if the owner passed, the land was valued as highest potential, and that was at full development. And most of the farmers couldn't afford the inheritance taxes they're required to pay to maintain the land. And that was always an issue. And I can't imagine how many times developers were knocking on the doors of these farmers, trying to get them because it was a critical area. So call for agricultural presence. It also talked about balanced growth, that we really need to look. We're very much a residential community in Pittsford, always has been, always will be, but it wanted a little bit more balance in there in terms of the mix of housing, mix of types of housing, and that. But it also called for a fiscal impact study to be done, looking at current land use policies and the effect they have on taxes, and those taxes would be primarily town and school taxes, the local taxes that drive it. The other thing that really struck the community was the Lust Farm, which was farm located at the Milepost intersection, which is Stone, Mendon Center Road, Mendon Road, and Main Street, right across from the Milepost Cemetery, was lost to development, and it broke the community's heart. But I think it was the first time, in my opinion, that the community realized that zoning was not a magic wand. We couldn't just say, go away, developer, or you're not going to develop it. It just wasn't that. I mean, the rights of property owners, the rights of developers was set that once sold, and once sold for that, properties could be developed. So I think that was a big loss for us, but I think it was also an important step in the realization of the community. In 1993, we actually completed a fiscal impact study. We brought in the Center for Governmental Research, who took a look at our zoning, looked at taxes, looked at all the policies that were there, and really looked at a couple things. At the upper bar, basically is showing where they said as a residential community taxes were going to go. You can see what it is just a very upward trend of continually paying taxes. Down below was a suggestion if we added 15% more non-residential growth, that where the taxes could go was under that. But we all know how that would have been accepted. People were happy that we were limited in our non-residential, our commercial, our industrial offices. So it's nice, and yes, communities that have a lot of non-residential property, it shows, but that was not the character of our community. There are several things here that were important, and I want to kind of review those. Clearly, the study showed that growth in taxes were at a collision course. We're clearly going to keep growing the taxes to support that the town typical household will pay increased taxes of $700 a year to support continued growth as it was going. The break-even value of a house was marked at $300,000. Now, even in 1993, there was a lot of money, but not all houses were being bought and sold at $300,000. So it showed that there was already an inherent problem within how the structure was done. Again, increased commercial and development could decrease future taxes if that's what they wanted. And they also determined the break-even cost to buy PDR would be at around $10,000 an acre, would be reasonable on the tax side of this. Very important. So in 1994, I took office, in January 1994. We had already hired a planner, Saratoga Associates, to begin the planning process and start moving forward with it. We spent about a year and a half getting to this. So at that point, there was about 3,600 acres of land left in the town. That was all the undeveloped land. And I remember one of the first meetings I went to, I talked to the community and said, we're at a fork in the road. One path leads us to full development. And what we'll see is full development, houses and things. So the other path led us to preserving the things that make Pittsford what it is and preserving the character of the community for generations to come. So we started down the path, realizing that was where we wanted to go. The question was, how do you get there? And it was challenging. So this plan was adopted in 1995. So the biggest recommendation, one of the biggest recommendations, was resource protection. It established a goal for protecting 2,000 acres of open space. Now, how did we come up with 2,000 acres? 3,600 acres of land left. The 50-50 zoning, we're going to get 50% of it anyways, got us 1,800 acres. So we just rounded up to 2,000 acres. So that's how that number really came about. It suggested that to utilize the fiscal model to help community revenues and expenses based on land use to determine the cost and benefits of preserving open space. And also called for the development of a rating system to determine how you make choice and what should be saved, what shouldn't be saved along the way. So what we found was there was no rating system at a town level. Almost all the rating systems were either state or county. And at that level, they would fly right over what we had left because we didn't have enough acreage to really meet those models. So the first thing we had to do was create a system. We put together a 17-member committee to work on this and develop this. Anybody ever worked with a 17-person committee? It's not easy. It's not easy. It represented every single group in this community. Residents, developers, farmers, Historic Pittsford, I believe, was on that. The Greenbelt Association was on that. It was intended to be representative. It was divided into three groups. One was agricultural, the second was ecological, and the third was kind of generic other open spaces. They were charged with creating a rating system for each of those areas. We gave them a deadline. About halfway through, they came back after they'd really been in disagreement for a while, asked us to extend the deadline, and we said we would not. They had to go to work and finish this job and get it done and stop finding differences. We told them they had to find common ground and make this thing work. So the evaluation systems were created. They were field tested. We wanted to make sure they were authentic. So they came back, we looked at the results, and we knew they were real. So minor tweaks, and the committee agreed to the systems. So this is the resource inventory and evaluation report. This is what the inventory actually looked like. So there was 94 properties that represented the 3,600 acres of land. And in this, you'll see for some or multiple owners, same properties to get it. So there was an agricultural rating and rank. There was an ecological rating and rank, and there was other open space rating and rank for each one. So we did that for all properties. When we finished, we invited all properties owners to come in and look at the rating. We asked them to challenge it if they didn't agree with it. And what we found was really interesting. A number of property owners came in and they didn't find much to challenge. They saw that it was real, that it was honest, and it said ranking. So thus we began. So now we have 3,600 acres of ranking that was there. What we then charged the planners to do, we said map the highest rated of each of the resources. So all the highest rated agricultural resources, all the highest rated ecological resources, and all the highest rated other resources. I will tell you I was nervous on this because I thought what was going to happen, we were going to come up over the 2,000 acres, and then how we were going to whittle it down, how were we going to make it meet the goal we were at. We were very fortunate. Here's the Greenprint. It was 1,800 acres of the highest rated resources that ended up on the Greenprint. Now, that made me happy because 1,200 acres was farmland. So if you take 1,200 acres off the 3,600 acres that existed, that meant there was still 2,400 acres of land left. And what were we going to get out of those 2,400 acres? Half. So it turns out we were actually going to get at least 2,400 acres of open space out of this program. Does that make sense to everyone? And that's why that 50-50 back there, that RRA zoning was really very, very important to this. So the interesting thing when we put this, and I forget who made the comment, but somebody off the cuff said, this isn't a blueprint, this is a Greenprint. And that's where the name was coined. And there was thought of patenting that name, which we had, because there's over 1,700 communities across the United States that have used Greenprint programs. How's that? It's very exciting.
Can you just tell us underneath each of those pictures what those words are? I can't really read them.
So the top, they're just a different one. The first one is agricultural. Yeah. The second one was ecological, and then the other was the other types of open spaces that we were looking at that are represented on this map. I think where is there a large map? I think in the historian's office there's one. If you really want to look at it, it's really very interesting to see. So what this Greenprint represents is saving about 67% of the land that left in Pittsford. 67% of the 3,600 acres would be preserved, and that's pretty phenomenal. So I was still nervous about PDR because of the 1989 experience. I just didn't know how that was going to go. But what became quite obvious to me after we saw the Greenprint, there was only one option to save the farms. There was really one option, that was PDR, purchase of development rights. We couldn't buy the farms and have tenant farmers. That wasn't going to work for them or us. There weren't really any other tool. Easement, not going to work, not going to be permanent. When we wanted permanency to this, so we began to see the realization that purchase of development rights was the answer to this. So we hired an appraisal firm to actually come in So the other thing we wanted to do was kind of find value. And the appraisal firm actually came in and determined that there was 2 value areas of land, one kind of in the southwest sector of town, and then the other properties, they had kind of two different models of value. We met with the farmers and their families. We sat down and talked about the concept of buying development rights. They were very concerned, but also very open to the discussions, and essentially we came to an agreement amongst others that this was worthwhile to move forward with. So with that, we began the process of moving forward. This is a slide, and I think it's quite telling, and I think this says a lot about the farm families in this community. There were 7 farms slated for protection. The total fair market value of the easement was $13,300,000. The offer price was $9.7 million. This means that the farm community in Pittsford gave up $3.6 million to make this deal work. And that says something a lot about them, about what they did knowingly and understandingly to make the commitment to their businesses, their farms, their families, but really what we had. So in June 5th, we'd begun the process of talking to the community about buying the development rights. We determined we need to borrow $9.9 million to do so, and that requires the adoption of a resolution, a bonding resolution to do so. So we set a public information meeting for June 5th, 1986, and then a public hearing for June 18th. Now, I'll tell you, these were held at Jefferson Road School. When I pulled in on the 18th for the meeting, the parking lot was already full. Now, as a supervisor, that's not usually a good sign. It's not usually the meeting you want to be at. you know the problem. But I will say that 90% of the people who were at that meeting spoke in favor of adopting the resolution for the purchase of development rights. So I think there's also it's important to realize that that the program, again, this is how we sold this. We're going to buy 1,200 acres on the 7 farms, total cost of $9.9 million. We estimated the cost to the taxpayer to buy the development rights and bond over a 20-year period was going to be $67 a year, or $1,340 over the course of that bond. We also showed them, the fiscal model showed that if we did not buy the development rights and these same properties developed, taxes would increase by $250 a year forever. So over the same period of time, the 20 years, it would have cost $5,000 to the average families if we did not buy the development rights. So PDR resulted in a savings over $3,600 to taxpayers by doing this. And that's quite something how we got to that, but it's really the truth. Because development we just kept driving, and you know, all the cost of services just keep going up. It costs money to keep our schools as good as they are, but there's a cost to all that. We were very fortunately, because subsequently we got $2.5 million in state and federal aid. So it further reduced down how much we had to bond. So we bonded around $7.2 million, so we further saved on that money. We received a lot of recognition in this plan. I mean, it was really very unique. I'll tell you, many of my peers thought I'd gone off the liberal deep end because, again, they didn't believe in buying open space and development rights, and you know, it sounded good, but hard to stand up there and do that. We won the Outstanding Planning Project from New York State Chapter in 1996. We won Award for Preservation of Places American Planning from the National Planning in 1998. We received the Alexander Calder Conservation Fund Award in 1999. And if you've never heard of this award, I'd say look it up. It's one of the most prestigious environmental awards that's given annually. So we're very, very proud of that. We received a visit from a delegation from mainland China that came over to look at what we were doing. Now, I'm not sure how we were going to help them, but I do remember riding around in a bus with them and talking to them, and I remember asking them what their feeling was, and they said, well, this is kind of like living in a park. Imagine their perspective for how they live to here. It was just so unique for them to see. And as I said earlier, there's about 1,700 Greenprint programs across the United States that was done. So very, very proud that people picked it up and have done with it. One of the things that I was in Red Hook giving a presentation on this, and John Bean, the town planner, called me and said, Bill, did you see the New York Times today? And I said, no. He said, you got to get it. This was the New York Times Business Day, and I see Mark Green in the back. You were prominent in this article. So this was the business section hailing this as a great conservative feat, because it used the preservation of open space and farmland for saving taxpayer dollars. It's really quite something. This was front banner headline on that paper that day. A lot of people need to be thanked. As I said before, Paul Spiegel, Maggie Freeman, previous supervisors, town board members, including current supervisor Bill Smith, town attorney Peter Spinelli, sitting right in the back, was one of the author of many of the documents that had to be created for this, and the easements and the approval documents. Land use planner John Bean, who to this day is one of my closest friends. He's a tremendous guy. I'm glad to hear he's going to be speaking, because he's a character, number one. He's a real character, but he was innovative. He was willing to bend the thoughts and ideas, and it really helped us get there and challenge us to think about how we could do this to make it work, and tremendous influence on them. Of course, the Pittsford farm community. They were great. It was challenging for both of us in many ways. I think we learned a lot about each other, but the Pittsford farm community was tremendous as we worked through this. Community organizations, Historic Pittsford, Pittsford Greenbelt Association were right by our sides the whole time and very helpful and supportive. The Pittsford development community. And why do I say that? A lot of the places that have had a hard time buying development rights have been challenged by the development community. They became a partner in this. I have to say, they sat and listened to us and talked and were willing to listen, and they became partners in this program. And I think that says a lot of where we were. And of course, the Pittsford residents. They were there for us. They supported us. From start to finish, Supervisor Smith said before, over 150 public meetings I held to make this happen. They were either sessions or individual groups, but we had a lot of meetings. I worked a lot of hours, but very worthwhile. So the greatest thing that Greenprint achieved is to preserve the character of our community for generations to come and save taxpayers for the long run. I can't imagine driving down Clover Street. I can't imagine driving over Willard Road. I can't imagine driving to the top of Knickerbocker Road and looking down and not seeing what's there. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous country, and it's made what we are. It was done by bringing diverse interests together, and as 100, I said 154, over 100 public meetings to ensure everyone's voices were heard. What makes me proudest? There was no laws passed. There was no zoning done. It was just good policy. And the Greenprint is here to last. Those farms will be there forever. People talk about them being brought together. But as I said to Supervisor Smith before, I can't imagine a supervisor of this community standing before the public saying, I want to sell those development rights back. I don't think that would fly. I think the community, as I know, would say, that's not happening. So I think what we've done is a good thing. So I want to thank Historic Pittsford for giving me this opportunity tonight. It was kind of fun for me to go through this and relive some of the memories we had, because so many of them were fun. They were challenging, but really inviting. I also want to say that you're sitting in one of my second favorite achievements, this library. It was another thing we knew we had to hurdle, trying to fix this problem. At that time, for every book that came in the library, a book had to be taken off the shelf. There was that much out of room at that time. And again, we brought people together, and this is such a wonderful place, and I'm very glad to be here to give this presentation. So I'd be glad to entertain any questions anyone has. Yes.
In talking about the opposition and sort of the conflict, which is pretty dramatic in the way you describe it, you mentioned that some of it had to do with not understanding or with people not wanting to invest the money. Were there other reasons? Because it sounded like it went really deep. What created that?
Yeah, the question was really about what really brought about opposition. I think a lot of it had to do with the concept. The value of the development rights was 90% of the value of the property. So if I walked in and said, I'm going to give you 90% of what your home is worth, but you can still live in it, people aren't going to understand that concept. It was a very hard concept for people to understand. And we're talking $9 million. I forget the value of those ones in 1989, but they were not low values either. They were millions of dollars each in their own right. So I think that was a whole concept that people said, well, is it worth us spending that much money? Is it really worth us taking that type of excessive liberal stand in a lot of ways? And that's what people thought it was. So it was a philosophical divide, I'd say it really was, because it was hard. It's hard talking to the community. It's hard standing up and saying, I want to increase your taxes. Is that okay? And that's essentially what we're doing. When we talk about borrowing $9.9 million, we're talking about asking people to pay additional taxes. But luckily, we were able to break it down. I think that you saw that with the $67 a year for 20 years versus $250 for 20 years and beyond. A little harder to make the argument, but there. I would say the opposition group was not as staunch as it was in 1989. It was staunch in 1989. This was a community divided. I think it was also helpful that we were able to get the development community to sit down at the table and be part of it rather than against it. Because again, the second vote in 1989, it was a lot of the development community money behind ads that were taken and supported that increased that vote by what I say 37%. So again, that's the risk in going to vote on bonding issues. How many people are willing to walk into a voting booth and say, yes, I'm going to vote yes to increasing my taxes? How many people are willing to understand it enough to pull yes or no lever in the right way? And that's the challenge you face. But I think, again, it goes back when I talked about the Lust Farm development, why that was so important. I think people finally got it, that how sad it is to lose it, but what's our alternative? What's the choice? It's either you develop it or you find some way to preserve it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, very quickly. What you buy the rights, the family or the owner continues to live there, what rights do they retain?
So for each and every one of these properties, there's a conservation easement document that's filed. That was common to all 7 properties. Am I correct, Peter? They were all the same, essentially the same. But that document spells out, but essentially they have the right to farm it. They have the right for open space. They have all the rights except to develop it.
What about, well, you can't sell it because there's nothing.
You could sell it. I mean, it could be sold for its agricultural value and the terms of the conservation easement.
Okay, what about leaving it to your family?
They can leave it to their family. They have all those same rights still within themselves. The only thing they've taken off, I mean, if you had oil on your property and somebody came in and wanted to buy the oil, you could sell them those mineral rights.
Yeah.
You still own the property. They own the mineral rights.
Right.
If we're in New York City, they sell air rights. There are different pieces that could be stripped off. Somebody still owns the property, and they still do and can do whatever they want. The conservation easement was, I mean, it was a thick document. It was not a small document at all. But they retain all those rights to sell it, to donate it, to give it to their family, to continue to farm it, and that's our goal. We want this to be farmed forever, because in the farmed in the farm state of those properties, in my opinion, is what really shows off the topography. If that went fallow, I don't think the property would have the same feeling to it that it does now. So we want it to be farmed forever. We hope it will. And my understanding out of this, a couple farmers actually bought the remaining value of the property. I think the Sweeney Farm and the Mano Farm were two that were bought because it was affordable. You know, now it's down to that 10% value. Yes, ma'am.
Are you saying that the farmers are not required to farm the property?
Question is, are the farmers required to farm? I don't know how we could do that. I mean, it was bought with their intent and their goal to farm it, but the conservation easement doesn't say thou shalt farm it. I mean, if their farm business would ever got into trouble, I mean, I don't know how we do that. But again, the hope was that if for any reason one farm family needed to not farm, that probably there was other of the farm families that would most likely step in to purchase and retain those. Because the other thing that had been happening over the years is the farmers were dependent on a lot of lease land. And that lease land is getting further and further away from them to farm. So this makes a concentration for them that's helpful to them. Not permanent, but it's helpful. Yes?
I assume that these 7 farmers get paid from the town of Pittsford on an annual basis, is that?
So the question is, do the farmers get paid on an annual basis? No, it was a one-time payment. It was a purchase. It was a purchase of the development rights for a specific value for each farm. And that was completed. Now it took us, I think we closed in the last one, I want to say 2003. It took us a while to get through to actual closing on all the farms. It took us about 4 or 5 years, I want to say. That was the challenge point, because you get down to hundreds and thousands of words, and it was valuable though.
So if they sold the property, did they have to sell it only for the 10%? Did I hear you say that? Or can they sell it for any amount?
So the question is, what could they sell it for amount? Again, the value and the appraisal of the property is going to take into account the development rights were stripped off it and whatever that remaining value was at that time.
So if they bought it today, they'd only be buying it for 10%?
Well, the primary driving value, which is being able to sub that property into multiple lots and gain value for each of those lots, that's gone. That's gone. And again, that's the value of the purchase of development rights. It's hard to understand because people don't have that concept that one of the rights you have is I can divide this up into 150 lots. That's one of the rights. They're gone. Those are gone. They can't. Is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. Is it probable? No. Those would have to be merged back together, and a property owner and the town would have to come together, and then that would have to be sold to the community. And I see somebody being run out on a railroad and tarred. Audrey.
What I wanted to say was to commend you, Bill, for this many meetings, years, and so forth, putting it together so that those people who were not here when all this went on can understand all the work and the concept and how it was put together, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Audrey. She's mentioning all the time. But it's also important for me to recognize it wasn't just me. There's other supervisors that really blazed the trail. Because even if you go back to, I think it was 1975, there was a master plan adopted under Paul Spiegel. And if you look at that, it calls for the preservation of the southwest side of Pittsford. There weren't tools, no teeth, no real, but there was vision. There was that beginning of the vision, and it went on to Maggie Freeman, and went on to me, and luckily, I was the lucky one to be in the spot to pull it through. Would it have been easy to run from? I couldn't have done that. Because when I talked about being at the fork in the road, I saw that. I knew what was going to happen. I knew what Clover Street was going to look like. I didn't like that vision. I didn't like that vision. You know, Pittsford had lost a lot. We're charmed because we have a very unique and charming village. We have one of the best school districts in the country. But what Pittsford is, we're a farm in an Erie Canal community. You know, and those are the things that make us and make us who we are and why people were attracted to begin it. And when it's gone, it's just gone. And we've seen communities. So all we got to do is look around other places and see spots, say, geez, I remember when. We're not going to do that here, and that's what's nice. So thank you, Audrey. Peter?
Picking up on that last point, Bill, you don't have to look very far. Perrington has about the same square miles that we do, and they have twice the population. They have a lot of commercial development, of course, which helps with their taxes, but they have a lot of what some would refer to as suburban sprawl with a lot of housing developments. The other compliment I wanted to make, you and the town board, making the decision not to put this up for a referendum, because that would have drawn out a lot of fire, particularly from the developers who would see the value of developing the land into housing. So there was a risk in that. The town board passed the resolution, but did not call for a referendum. And that resulted in a lawsuit.
It did.
That was dismissed.
Thank you, Peter. He talked about the fact that we did not go to the vote. There's not a lot of resolutions that are required to go to vote in New York State. So it's subject to what's called a permissive referendum. So when the resolution was adopted, residents then have a specified period to pass petitions to require it be put on a ballot. And I believe there were petitions passed, and I believe the petitions were challenged, and there was enough signatures thrown out that they were not able to obtain enough to force us on the ballot. It's what I said before. When you put up something in general and you ask people to go vote for it, they may or may not have paid attention to any of what we've said or did over 100 meetings, 1,000 meetings, whatever you want to do. It's what did they hear that day that's going to influence them, and it's hard to ask people to go into a voting booth to approve increasing their taxes. In 1989, there was an ad the developers took out that was later dismissed as false. It wasn't false advertising, but it's unfair practice. But the problem is the horse was out of the barn. It worked. It worked because it got the people out, and it's just they're difficult concepts. And is it a distrust I have of people? It's not. It is not. It is. I trust our community a lot and do this, but there's also a sense of doing the right thing in the right way, and this was done the right way and for all the right reasons. And the fact that you saw that Resource Protection Committee, having 17 people on a committee, was I nuts? But it worked. That's the only way you get the buy-in from that cross-section of people to do that, and then invite the property owners to challenge it, and they couldn't challenge it. There was a lot of detail to this that it's hard to show, but you saw that one graph I showed of those numbers. We sent people out in the field for over a month doing those inventories, and those were all professionals who did those. Those were hired professionals for each of those categories to do the rating to make sure that it was all done the right way. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier you talked about the fact that the cost was $67 per resident, and if you hadn't done it, it was $250. But I don't understand what that cost would be.
So the $67 was the cost it would take to repay the bond. The $250 is what the fiscal impact study said if all those properties developed. The increase in services for town and school district would raise at $250 a year forever. And they would have. They would have.
You mean like increase in school attendance or?
Just the increased cost.
Police or?
The just increased cost of running the schools. Maybe more schools. That may have been a factor. I don't remember all the details. But the buses, the teachers, the cost of maintaining the properties, all the things that are done for every single new house that's built. Does that make sense?
No.
No? Yeah.
I'm still grappling with the expectation is that everything you say would be developed. Is that?
No. The $67 was for if we bought the development rights and it did not develop. The $250 was we did not buy the development rights and all those properties were developed. The increased cost of services to support all those new homes, kids, people, whatever it is, roads, buses, open space, programs, libraries, all those things that come with more people. More people, there's more expectation.
I know that the Sokol farm did not go for it, right? What other farms didn't?
What other farms were not included in this? Ooh, now you're stretching my memory. What's the one out of Mendon Center Road? What was that farm? Mark? The one up at the top of the hill, on, is it Mendon Center Road?
Yeah, Shane.
That was a Manor farm.
Yeah, that was Mayor.
No, further out.
Shane?
Oh, Shane.
The Shane property, that was not included. There was a few others. I don't remember the names off the top, but there was 2 or 3 or 4 others that were not purchased. They just didn't have the ratings that these others had. Yes, sir.
I might have missed the point. My question is, when the farmers die, their children are forced to obey that agreement with their father or forefather, the agreement with the town?
Could say that again for me, please.
I'm saying when the farmer is gone, he has 4 children and they do not want to farm. They want to farm and do not want to farm, they want to sell it. Can they sell it?
So the question is, if the farmer dies, the property owner dies, and there's family inherit that no longer want to farm, can they sell it? The answer is yes.
Then what we gain then after 1 generation?
So it can only be sold for agricultural purposes, open space purposes. It can't be sold for development.
But there are 4 children and they fight with each other, then litigation will be going on forever. What will happen in the meantime?
Yeah, so again, the thinking is that if there's a farm family that no longer wishes to farm, the value of that farmland is now such that one of the other farm families may step up and buy that property and expand their farms.
But that's a big may.
Well,
It happened.
it already happened in 2. Yeah, we had 2 farms where they bought it because yeah. So the farm families couldn't afford to buy additional property before because it was $20,000-$30,000 an acre. Now without those development rights, it's nowhere near that value. So it's more affordable. Yeah, any plan cannot be cast in concrete. It's cast in what you think is best and what you know is right. So they can keep that as open space. Nothing forces them to farm it. But their value, I would think, the most likely buyer would be another farmer, I would think, because of what else is somebody going to do with it? How many people want to buy open space just to have open space?
They can also lease it to other farmers.
Correct. That's correct. Correct.
That way that family makes some money out of it.
Yep.
Because they know they can't build houses on it.
Yep.
So even if they don't sell it to another farmer, they can lease it. And actually, farmers lease some town land now.
Yep.
That's not my question. The question is, with your 4 children, do want to sell it for development purpose, are they bound not to?
Can't be sold for development purpose. Can't be.
Cannot be. Cannot be. Doesn't matter what they think. The town owns the development rights. The town owns those. They could only sell it for...
It's tied up with state and federal grants.
That's correct.
It'll never be unraveled.
That's correct. I forgot about that.
Most of these farms are not adjacent to one another. Correct?
Well, I mean,
Well, the point I'm trying to get at, adjacency may not be the issue. Monoculture of a crop. Right now, places like the Powers Farm do all kinds of things. But if they farmed it, they could farm it as a grow nothing but soybeans or corn, right? Which brings an entirely different essentially allude to the farming community. It is much more different than the kind of family farm that we're looking at.
So I think, Mark, and I guess I'm going to make the statement and see if I'm making this the right way. I think Powers is a unique farm.
Yeah.
You know, they are more direct sellers more than they are. Most of the other farms are truck farms. Is that an appropriate term, Mark?
Well, grain farm.
Grain farms. So they're kind of large monoculture in what they're growing. But a lot of these are adjacent when you think about it. You think of the Hopkins farm, the Willard farm, and the Harlan-Knickerbocker farm. There's a lot of adjacency there. I mean, the Monroe-Knickerbocker farm kind of sits to itself. The Powers farm sits to itself.
But for good monoculture, you want to be able to go 2 miles in one direction with your harvester and then turn around and come back and take another 50-yard swath. And that won't happen with the way they're scattered around now.
Yeah. Well, that may be Midwestern farming, but I don't know if I don't know that's farming in New York.
Well, it's Montana.
Yeah, well, we've just been there, and it's that's a lot more horses than farms out there. It's horses and yes, ma'am.
We're pretty new to Pittsford. We've only been here for 4 years.
Well, welcome.
And in the last issue of the town newsletter, we saw the article about the Greenprint farms, and we decided we were going to take a tour. And the first one we went to was Powers. And they were having an open house that day, so we drove in, it was $10, and they took us all around the farm in this hay wagon. They had food, we had a corn maze. It was really wonderful. It was so wonderful. I went around twice. It was so beautiful. That farm was so beautiful.
They're all beautiful. They're all beautiful in their own right, and it's again that's where had we lost them, Pittsford would not be what it is today. It would be a great place. It always going to be, but it was going to be different. It would have lost its character, and that would have been too bad. I want to thank all of you for coming out. I really appreciate this, appreciate questions. If you have any follow-up questions, Laura, can they direct them to you? And I'd be glad to get with you and answer whatever that can to help.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I just want to say that I really appreciate Bill for coming in and preparing this. This is not a small amount of work to put this together and to try to condense this for us. One of the things that I came to, and you were probably supervisor when you were my age, about 25 years ago, and it's surprising to me how many people do not know what this is at this point in our community. A lot of people have moved in, or a lot of people have not been here for a long time, and most people that I have talked with in my peer group and other parents have never heard of this, and have really never really thought how intentional the farmland is around Pittsford, that it just was sort of there because it's always been there, and it's just the way it, that it just happened to be that way, and it'll probably always be that way. But this is very intentional. And I think that that's what's really important, is that those who are here tonight or watching this video, that you share that with other people, that this was intentional, and part of this is a plan that has been award-winning to help us in our community. And these are the kinds of things that are so important, that were important then and continue to be important. So please be on the, I should have taken this off, be on the lookout for additional programming that we have coming up. We will be continuing to talk about the Greenprint throughout this year, on this anniversary year. And I appreciate you all coming. Any questions you may have, or for how you may want some additional programming structured on that, let me know. You can write to Historic Pittsford at gmail.com. You can also, you can get to me directly, Lori Likeb at gmail.com, but Historic Pittsford is really the best way to do that. And I just wanted to say thanks again. And thanks all for coming.